Just 6 days shy of his 36th birthday and just a little over 3 months removed from a first-round knockout loss to Ilia Topuria, Charles Oliveira returned to his home country of Brazil and picked up a dominant, convincing second-round finish over the 8th-ranked lightweight on the planet, Mateusz Gamrot. And this was in Oliveira's return to his home nation of Brazil for the first time since March of 2020, and also his first time on a fight night card since that very same night. I stated in the preview show just how important that this lightweight clash was between the 4th-ranked former champion Deiveson Oliveira and the 8th-ranked Mateusz Gamrot. For Charles, it was his opportunity to bounce back after a title fight loss and hold his name amongst the title contenders at 155 pounds, and for Mateusz Gamrot, it was his opportunity to finally get that big victory on his resume and launch himself directly into title contention for the first time in his career. And as we can see in hindsight, Charles Oliveira is still that guy. He still holds the finishing prowess and can get the job done against elite level contenders all throughout different stages of their careers, whether it's a prospect, a veteran like himself, or someone in between like Gamrot. And from an X's and O's perspective, this fight wasn't necessarily leaning on the side of Charles Oliveira, as the betting odds would have said so heading into the bout as well, due to the takedown offense and grappling that Mateusz Gamrot possesses, paired with the lack of takedown defense of Charles Oliveira, at least historically throughout his career, sitting at 56%. And in the first round of this fight, we saw Gamrot do just that. We saw him take down Oliveira with relative ease early on into the bout, but it wasn't long before Oliveira was able to reverse position and threaten with submissions and have the back of Gamrot to finish out the remainder of that round. And heading into round 2, it was all Deiveson, because the pressure and pace that he was putting on in the stand-up realm for Gamrot was absolutely unbelievable. It was giving me vibes of the Khabib versus Gaethje fight many years ago. He was just stalking Gamrot on the feet, not giving him any respect in terms of his striking capabilities and power, which would then allow Oliveira to get Gamrot down to the ground with a takedown of his own, and that would lead to him locking up another submission win, this time via face crank / rear naked choke, which led to Charles Oliveira picking up his 24th UFC victory, tying him for second all time with Neil Magny, his 21st finish, improving his lead over the second place Jim Miller by 2, 21-19, his 17th UFC submission, extending his lead over, you guessed it, Jim Miller, 17-13 in second place, and his 21st post-fight bonus, also extending his first place record over Donald Cowboy Cerrone, 21-18. Deiveson is shattering records, and even as a soon-to-be 36-year-old, he is getting the job done, not only just by getting victories, but doing it in very convincing and, more often than not, finishing style. He has now won 36 fights as a professional mixed martial artist, bringing his total of finishes to 32, with 22 submissions and 10 knockouts. And this was a huge get-right moment for Charles, again, to hold his spot amongst the title contenders, and in the aftermath, he called his shot, and dare I say, it's going to be one of the more highly anticipated bouts from an MMA fan perspective of all of 2026, and I think the UFC has to pull the trigger on it. No ifs, no ands, no buts. And his call out was this.
Hey Hunter, Charles Oliveira versus Max Holloway, BMF. Vamos fazer acontecer essa.
Hey Hunter, Charles Oliveira and Max Holloway, BMF. Let's make that happen.
And go find me a mixed martial arts fan that says no to this. Oliveira versus Max Holloway, part 2 for the BMF championship. A rematch that by the time it takes place in 2026 will be nearly 11 years in the making, after their first fight was in August of 2015, where the fight would end relatively early on, just 1 minute and 39 seconds into the bout, due to a TKO esophagus injury on the side of Charles Oliveira. The former 155-pound champion with title defenses in Charles Deiveson versus the former featherweight king Max Holloway that also had numerous title defenses, squaring off against one another before they are too far removed from their primes. Two of the most fan-friendly fighters in UFC history, two of the all-time greatest fighters that the company has ever seen. And not only does it check all of those boxes, but it's also a massive fight for the state of the lightweight division right now that is still without a title challenger for Ilia Topuria's throne, although it is pretty much assumed to be either Justin Gaethje or Paddy Pimblett. We're just waiting to see which fighter the UFC decides to put in there with Topuria after learning of Arman Tsarukyan's November 22nd main event bout against Dan Hooker in Qatar. But we know now that Max Holloway Holloway is going to finish out his UFC career in the lightweight division, and he did so by re-debuting in the weight class, getting a victory over Dustin Poirier back in July via decision, and so he now finds himself ranked number 3 in the lightweight division, and come Tuesday morning, Charles Oliveira will likely still be holding on to that number 4 spot after beating the 8th ranked Gamrot behind him. So it would be two of the best fighters in UFC history, two of the most beloved fighters from an MMA fan perspective in UFC history, and two top 4 ranked lightweights squaring off against one another, both looking to make their win streaks 2 in a row against elite level fighters in the same weight class, therefore giving the winner a very, very clear shot at getting a lightweight championship opportunity regardless of who the champion may be in the aftermath of their early 2026 bout. So I want to hear from you down in the comments below. 1, what did you make of this awesome performance from Charles Oliveira? Being that he is about to turn 36 years of age, do you still think that he has a title run in him? Can he become the champion a second time? And if so, that must believe that you think he will pick up a victory in his next bout. And will that be against Max Holloway, the fight that he called for, that left MMA fans chopping at the bit to see the rematch in 2026? In the co-main event of the evening, we saw the 37-year-old Deiveson Figueiredo, the former flyweight champion, turned very hopeful bantamweight contender throughout his first 3 bouts in the bantamweight division, starting 3-0, bounce back after losing his last 2 fights heading into this bout to Petr Yan and Corey Sandhagen, and he got the bounce-back win against Montel Jackson, who was the 15th-ranked 135-pounder in the world and who was riding a 6-fight win streak heading into UFC Rio. And now that we can say, looking back on this fight, Deiveson pretty much shut down any offense that Montel Jackson had in his arsenal, but to be fair, I felt like this was Montel Jackson just too frightened and scared to pull the trigger. And I think maybe that was the case due to him not wanting to be on his back and getting taken down from Deiveson, but I felt like as the fight progressed onward, he was able to fend those takedowns off more so than he was able to do in round number 1, and that's why I was a little bit disappointed in the performance that we saw from Montel, specifically in rounds 2 and 3, when I felt that he would have been able to pull away in this fight, because on the feet, when he was letting go in the exchanges, he was winning this fight. Deiveson looked great in round 1. He was able to get Montel Jackson down. He was able to hold his own on the feet, but as the fight progressed, Deiveson looked a little bit slower throughout rounds 2 and 3, and Montel never necessarily looked tired, but he just never pressed forward on the gas pedal. He never utilized his quickness and his size advantages, both in his height and reach, and he was just a much more polished, powerful striker, but he did not let his hands go. And I think that when he gets back home to the States and he watches the tape on this one, he's going to see the holes that Deiveson would have left open for him to capitalize on in the striking realm, and he's going to be kicking himself for not kicking it into a second gear, especially in round number 3 when he should have known that he needed a finish victory. And somehow, someway, judges just continue to set the standard higher and higher, because someone actually scored this fight for Montel Jackson 29-28, resulting in a split decision win for Deiveson, and that is just absolutely unacceptable, especially when you look at the official scorecard and notice that the judge that gave Montel Jackson the fight also scored the first round for him, and that was the most decisive round of the entire fight, and it was for Deiveson Figueiredo, not for Montel Jackson. It just feels like week by week, whether it's the UFC or the PFL, like we saw with Usman Nurmagomedov and Paul Hughes last weekend, there's always a scorecard throughout the card that leaves us baffled as MMA fans, and I don't know what we can necessarily do to change it until these judges are held accountable for their actions and have to speak on behalf of their scorecards in the aftermath, specifically if there isn't a very large outlier like there was in this fight. But thankfully, Deiveson Figueiredo was the rightful winner, and that was who inevitably did get the victory. And that was a big victory for Deiveson because, as I said, he was on a 2-fight losing streak against the 2 biggest fights and best names that he had fought at bantamweight so far in Corey Sandhagen and Petr Yan. So now he will hold his spot in the top 10, where he currently sits at number 6, and come Tuesday morning, I do believe that he's going to still be at least 1, if not 2 wins away from getting a bantamweight title shot. And that is just because there are a lot of moving pieces going on right now, because as I mentioned on Friday, we are kind of in the midst of a little October marathon for the title contention discussion in this bantamweight division. At UFC 320, we saw Merab Dvalishvili defend his title for the 3rd time, and this time he did it against Corey Sandhagen. At UFC Rio, we saw Deiveson Figueiredo bounce back from a 2-fight skid and get a decision win over Montel Jackson, who was ranked 15th. Next weekend at UFC Vancouver, we will see Marlon Chito Vera versus Ayman Zahabi, number 7 versus number number 9 respectively, someone surging in Zahabi versus a former title challenger in Vera. And then capping out the month of October at UFC 321 on October 25th, we will see another former title challenger, this time the second-ranked Umar Nurmagomedov, taking on the 8th-ranked surging Mario Bautista, who has the biggest win streak in the division right now outside of Merab. So it's very possible that heading into 2026, after the conclusion of October, we will have the next number 1 contender for Merab's throne at bantamweight, which is likely the winner of Umar versus Bautista, especially if it's Mario that gets the victory that night. Then I think it's very plausible that Deiveson could sit on this victory and get the winner of next week's bout between Vera and Zahabi. Again, he's already beaten Vera, but especially if it's Zahabi that gets the victory. And I think it's also a possibility that he could face the loser of Umar versus Bautista. And then there are also 2 other names that don't have an official fight booked at the moment, but there are rumors floating around that they will be facing off against one another in the final pay-per-view of the year on that December 6th UFC 323 card, and that is the former champion and number 1 ranked Sean O'Malley and the 5th ranked Song Yadong, which would be an absolute delight at bantamweight for fight fans. So with all of these moving pieces right now, especially with the 4 top 15 matchups solely in the month of October alone, what would you do if you were the UFC matchmakers for this bantamweight division and for the champion in Merab Dvalishvili? Who will be the next number 1 contender out of these bouts that are happening, or will it come down to who gets the most convincing victory instead? And then also put together all those other pieces. What are the matches that you would want to see early on in 2026 as a result of these October 2025 bantamweight matchups? We have a new player on our hands in the heavyweight division, and that is Mario Pinto out of Portugal, who is 11-0 and is only 27 years of age and now has finished 8 of his 11 victories, and that includes his win at UFC Rio against Janata Deniz, where he absolutely dominated this fight and steamrolled Deniz en route to a second round TKO after picking him up and slamming him down on the mat numerous times, having plenty of minutes of control time, landing vicious ground and pound strikes, threatening with submissions. He did it all in this bout en route to keeping his perfect record alive, and he is now 2-0 in the UFC following up his debut fight in March where he knocked out Austin Lane. He's a 2024 Contender Series alum. He's 6'5", he's long, he's rangy, he's powerful, he's also pretty lean for this heavyweight division, and I think that now after 2 bouts and 2 very impressive performances, he has done enough to already get a top 15 matchup in this heavyweight division because this weight class is struggling. It needs fresh life breathed into it, especially in the back half of the rankings throughout the number 10 through 15 spots, and that is exactly where I believe Mario can find himself on Tuesday morning. And even if he doesn't have a ranking next to his name, he best be fighting someone with a number next to their name next for sure. I think it's very possible that you could even match him up with the 15th ranked Walter Walker, who was scheduled to fight on this UFC Rio card, but the fight had to be pulled last minute due to his opponent Muhammad Usman popping for PEDs. But personally, if I'm the UFC, I want to push Mario just a little bit higher, a little bit quicker than the number 15 ranked Walker. So I'm leaning on the side of someone like an 11th ranked Tai Tuivasa, who hasn't fought in 17 years it feels like, but still is ranked in the top 15, or the 12th ranked Shamil Gaziev. I think both would be good tests for Mario to prove that he belongs in the top 15, but in the same breath are very winnable fights for him. And not only can he get a victory, but I believe that he could also get another big time performance and finish over both of those names as well. A lot of these names in the top 15 we have seen for years and years at this point, and have even been in the mix of title contention, and in the back half there just isn't enough movement. So that is why if I'm the UFC, I am taking Mario Pinto, a young up and coming talent out of a country that isn't as well represented in the UFC as others in Portugal that doesn't have a ton of fighters. You throw him right into the mix of the top 15 in a sink or swim situation, and 2026 could prove to be a very big year for him, and he could end the year in title contention even if he continues to put together performances like he has done through his first 2 UFC bouts. Con Offley out of Australia came into enemy territory against the Brazilian Ricardo Ramos, and not only into enemy territory, but came in as a betting underdog, and he put it all to the wayside and picked up a first-round submission victory over the veteran Ramos, which would mark the first UFC win for Con Offley, who was 0-2 heading into this UFC Rio bout and potentially fighting for his job. And now at 32 years old, right in his prime, he holds a record of 12-4-1, and he has finished 8 of those 12 wins with 6 of the 8 by way of submission, and it's clear that he is going to be a part of fun fights in this 145-pound weight class. Another fighter that picked up their first UFC victory was Michael Ashwell, who got a first-round TKO over Lucas Almeida. And this one comes with a little bit of controversy because if we flash back to Friday and look at the face-offs between one another, if you look at the right hand of Lucas Almeida, you'll notice that it looked just a little bit swollen and, dare I say, broken. But somehow, someway, he was able to get through medical clearance and into the octagon Saturday night. And now in the aftermath, it's looking a little bit fishy, as he probably shouldn't have been able to go in there if his hand truly was broken. And Michael Ashwell made quick work of him, not only getting a first-round TKO, but he did it in less than 2 minutes, en route to his 11th professional victory, but just his 6th knockout. So I'll be curious to see how we can matchmake Ashwell moving forward as he wants to continue to climb closer to the top 15. Dare I say, you could even pair him up with Con Offley, who was one fight ahead of him, as we previously talked about, because he was also a featherweight that got his first UFC win. The next first-round finish of the night belongs to Jafel Filho, who made quick work of Clayton Carpenter by getting a submission against him with just 18 seconds to go in the opening round, and he has now won 3 of his last 4 bouts, and all 3 of those victories are by way of submission. And at 32 years old, right in his prime in this flyweight division, he should be fighting a ranked flyweight in his next bout, because he is now 17-4 and has finished 16 of his 17 victories, with 11 of them by way of submission. He is an all-action fighter, and he holds a victory over Ode Osborne, so he has been in there with high-level competition before, and I think it's time for him to get a top 15 fighter next. Vitor Petrino continues to make good on his heavyweight journey, now improving to 2-0 in the weight class with 2 finishes, and this one was an absolutely brutal one-punch knockout against Thomas Peterson in the 3rd round of their fight, where he would land an uppercut that sent him face-planting down to the canvas. And I already talked about Mario Pinto being a breath of fresh air for the heavyweight division, and I think you could say the same for Vitor Petrino, the former light heavyweight contender turned 2-0 heavyweight at just 28 years of age, not even in his prime yet, with a record of 13-2, having finished 11 of those 13 with 9 knockouts. These are 2 fighters that are exactly what the heavyweight division ordered. Just keep them away from each other so that they can get good fights respectively next, because as I said, Pinto deserves top 15, and after this 2-0 run for Petrino, I think the same can be said for him. The highly accredited jiu-jitsu player Mia Beskida made her UFC debut on this Rio card and got a second-round submission win over Irene Alexieva, improving her perfect record to 6-0 with 4 submissions and 1 knockout, and has been extremely active since making the switch from jiu-jitsu artist to professional mixed martial artist, because all 6 of her bouts have come since June of 2024, and she has never even seen a 3rd round. So if I'm the UFC, I am capitalizing on this hype, of this momentum, and of the name value of Mosqueda, and I'm immediately thrusting her directly into a top 15 matchup, because she is in the 135 bantamweight division, which is the lesser of the 3 women's weight classes in the UFC, so it desperately needs new additions and action to take place in the top 15. And I just think that we need to continue to capitalize on the momentum that the division as a whole has right now, with the new champion of Kayla Harrison, with Yana Santos getting a win last week, launching herself 5 spots up the ranks to number 5, with Ketlin Vieira and Norma Dumont scheduled to fight on November 1st, and ladies like Eileen Perez and Jacqueline Cavalcanti rising up the ranks as prospects, and veterans like Jocelyn Edwards having a career resurgence right now. Bia can immediately be inserted into that same discussion and face a top 15 fighter in just her 2nd UFC bout, in my opinion. The 27-year-old Julia Pilastri improved to 2-2 in her young UFC career so far at just 27 years of age, and she got a big victory over the former title challenger and longtime veteran Karolina Kowalkiewicz, and after having a very impressive 2.5 rounds, she picked up the 3rd round TKO victory, improving to 14-5, and she has finished 8 of her 14 wins with 5 knockouts and 3 submissions, and I think she is right on the cusp of top 15 in the strawweight division, maybe just one more victory before she earns the shot at facing a ranked fighter, especially when you consider that she took on Lupi Godinez back in March, and after dropping the first 2 rounds to Lupi, she had an incredible performance in the 3rd and final against someone who is now sitting at number 6 at 115. It's clear that Pilastri does have a good ceiling in this weight class. And lastly, in the opening fight of the UFC Rio card, we saw Luan Lacerda pick up his first UFC win after starting his tenure in the promotion 0-2, and he did so with a 2nd round submission over Simon Oliveira, improving his record to 13-3, and he has submitted 11 of his 13 professional victories, sits at 32 years old, right in his prime, and in the absolutely loaded 135-pound bantamweight division. And not to mention mention, he didn't have it easy in his first 2 UFC bouts because it was against Damon Blackshear and Cody Stamann, 2 guys that are longtime veterans of the fight game, and Damon Blackshear has been having a lot more success as of recent as compared to when he started his UFC career. So it's good to see Lacerda bounce back and show that he does have potential at 135. So that is it for the UFC Rio recap, and I want to get all of your thoughts and your takeaways on this fight card down in the comments below, especially in those top 2 fights. In the lightweight division, Charles Oliveira bouncing back from his title fight loss earlier this year, getting a big-time submission over Mateusz Gamrot. Does he still have another title run in him, and is his next bout going to be against Max Holloway, a rematch 11 years in the making by the time it happens, and for the BMF title? If you enjoyed this recap, please be sure to drop a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new, because we are on the road to reaching 1,000 subscribers, and the goal is to hit that before the end of the year, and we have a lot of momentum going right now in the month of October, and I hope that we can continue to capitalize on that and grow this community. You can also join the discussion on social media at Verbal Spar MMA on X, Instagram, and TikTok, as well as like the Facebook page Verbal Sparring MMA, and you can follow on your favorite audio listening platforms such as Spotify and Apple, where every Monday and Friday podcast episodes released there. Have a great week, and I will see you all in the next video.